My name is Laura Moseley, and I was born in Detroit at Henry Ford Hospital, October 29th, 1943.
You can ignore the camera.
Okay, I'm looking at
You can just, yeah, we're
or-
just gonna have a conversation.
Okay.
This guy is here to just,
Okay,
so we can use it for the internet.
okay.
What degrees did you pursue at the university, and when were you there?
I first entered the university in 1960, and I got my BA in English Lit in 64 and my teacher's certificate. I did enter at age 16, and I did graduate at age 20. And much later, mid-career in fact, I decided I needed to know more. So I went to take care of myself as a business owner and a bad divorce. So I really did something. I applied to only 2 law schools. And my whole thing was, well, if I don't get in, it's not meant for me to go at this time. But if I do get in, I'm going. And I got waitlisted at Yale, but I got admitted at Michigan, and no contest. I came back as the first wave of older students at UofM's law school.
And I understand you have you've worked for the university in the interim as well.
Yes. Well, first, even though at the law school there's this severe rule that when you're in law school you do not work, but when you're recently divorced, totally on your own, you go, okay. And then I ended up teaching freshman English, tutoring athletes, working in the law library, and writing a paper or 2. And that's how I got through law school.
Okay. So what made you decide to attend the University of Michigan for your bachelor's?
That's a really interesting question. When I was in high school, in Detroit, when Detroit had the best high schools in the nation, bar none. In fact, the campus of my high school would now equate a junior college or something. I didn't know it at the time, of course. Okay. And I'm from the integration generation. I'm very used to being the only African American or one of 3, wherever I went. So, I didn't know that I was in the 12th grade. I loved school. I took so many subjects and was student council, school paper. I just loved school. So in the 11th grade, when I thought I was going into the 11th grade, they told me I was going into the 12th grade because I had all these hours and stuff. And they said, so college, where are you going? Now I had a counselor, it was still a growth period, who told me I would never do anything but vocational. But I also had parents who came up and read the Riot Act and said she's going to college. And so, but I applied basically to Michigan and a few Eastern colleges, okay? And my parents totally steered me towards Michigan because of my age primarily. Good grief. We're not letting you go too far from home. So that's how I got to Michigan, and I had an older sister at Michigan. Okay.
What do you remember about your first days as a student in Ann Arbor?
I was so overwhelmed, but overwhelmed with joy too. Free at last, free at last. I can make my own decisions. I mean, really. And
at 16, no less.
yes, right. So it was just, it was a wonderful thing. The only thing is, and this may still be true today, race follows you wherever you go, even when you don't want to think about it. I remember it was a rainy day. My parents had left, and I thought I would go up to State Street. That time there was a drugstore on the corner of State and Eastview. Is it Eastview? Which university is it? Street is it?
Both, but it will be North U, I think.
Okay, whichever.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I'm going in and I'm getting a soda or something, and boy, I'm a grown-up. And if these 2 guys didn't come up to me Now I'm in a yellow rain thing and everything, so I didn't even think you could see me. And and this is truly how I remember the first thing they asked me, was I a negress? And if so, I was the first one they had ever seen. So then I said to myself, some things never change. Because I'm used to being the first, not quite that directly, but that put me on alert at least.
So where did you live when you first moved to Ann Arbor?
Moved to Markley, and it was a very new dorm at that time. And so that was kind of nice, and being in the really new and the really big dorm, all things considered. And went through a few roommates before I found the right one, and I guess they'd say the same. But I loved my Markley experience. In fact, before I left my junior year, I was the student advisor counselor for my particular dorm.
Would you like to say anything about those roommates that you had?
Well, yes, this is a lot of our conversation will be in the area of race relations. Sorry, but that's what I represent. The first one came from Scarsdale, New York, and had to have written on her application she wanted a roommate like me, but not quite like me. She wanted a poor, as she said, Negro. We were in transition between Negro and Black at the time, okay? And she was disappointed when she came to visit my home to find that it was actually an upper middle class neighborhood, very integrated actually. And she said, well, this was just like her home. She wanted a poor Negro. My next roommate, that did not last as long as it could have. My next roommate was from West Virginia. This is still within the first term, from West Virginia. And her personality was a little antisocial. She was having her own personal issues. But hey, I'm 16, so am I. But, and she got caught in the race thing too. She just kept saying, I'm a mulatto, I'm not really Negro. Okay, by my second term, I got a wonderful roommate, Gail Schneider from Pennsylvania. And we just became fast friends, and that was just delightful. By my, I think by the end of my first year, though, I was applying to Martha Cook. And my roommate at Martha Cook happened to be another Negro, Carol Clater, who's been a lifetime friend.
Okay. So did you enjoy Martha Cook more than Markley? What made you want to?
They're totally different, so you enjoy them for what each of them is. I like Martha Cook because there was a seriousness there in terms of women really wanting to get ahead. It was kind of a career incubator, so to speak. I don't know how Martha Cook is today, but when I was there, see, there's so many choices today. You can have co-ed living, you can have all kinds of stuff. But when I was there, Martha Cook stood out for two reasons. First, you didn't necessarily have hours the way, young women were guarded. When JFK came, it was the first time any of us could stay out till midnight. Just guarded in ways that don't happen now. So the guard was kind of let down a little bit. And then the second thing, Martha Cook was known, today we'd call it the nerd place, but if you were serious about studying and wanting to meet others who didn't just want to party, it was a good place to be.
So what kind of classes did you take? You said you majored in English literature.
Well, my first semester was a disaster. They put me all in pre-med. And I'm not if you're English lit, you are not pre-med. So it was like my English course I exempted from freshman English, and I was taking a poetry course, an honors poetry, and I just loved it. It kind of spoke out to me. Now, meanwhile, my older sister, who was the first African American, she has since passed, um, graduating eventually from the School of Architecture and Design, had major emotional problems. So it was my job to make sure she was doing all right, as well as to make sure I'm doing all right. But at least the second semester, I was able to choose courses that were more in keeping with what I was interested in. Now, I do want to put an asterisk beside the science stuff. If I had known that math equated to music numbers, to sounds and all that, I might have really been interested. But that's not how I was trained in that. I just thought, oh, this boring stuff, okay? If I had known that science could be the exploration of space, I didn't have the kind of teachers that could steer me to all of the wonders of science. And on my own, I already found my gift of writing, and I found the home there. Okay.
So thinking, broadly both about your undergraduate experience and your time in law school, how would you describe your career at the University of Michigan?
Challenging, but a little fun along the way, and pioneering, definitely. Let me say this, especially the first time, whether you wanted to be a pioneer or not, you were, and so you'd better just get with it and live up to the task, because it was thrust upon you.
And we've talked a little bit about, your experiences in the classroom, finding yourself in English Lit. What sorts of activities were you involved in outside of the classroom?
A lot, maybe more than I should have been. Well, at first I wasn't interested in joining any sorority. And then I felt compelled I should join a black sorority, and my mother was a big-time Delta. But all the wonderful Deltas, all 4 of them were graduating. And as I told my mother, I'm not starting a chapter here, I can barely survive, But the AKAs, there were all 8 of them, because you have to understand at this time on campus, there were less than 100 African Americans, and maybe closer to 60, 50, and we all had found each other. And so, as a study group, joining the AKA became my study group, okay? And when I was there, from the 8, maybe it grew to 12, certainly no more. And I think for the Kappas, the Alphas, I don't even think there were any Omega Qs. For whoever was there in terms of sororities and fraternities, it was small pickings. And so you did the best you could. And as your parents kept reminding you, your first job is to survive and to be able to graduate. So everything you did really was focused on academics of some sort. But we would say, boy, we don't have the exam library the other sororities and fraternities. Oh, they had incredible, how could you miss? We could barely just figure out what do you think's going to be on the exam, and stuff like that. So we saw major differences between the benefits of being in a college sorority than the mainstream. Now, having said that, I must admit, I was tapped for Scroll, which is an honorary society within the Greek structure for women. So I think they tapped more. I might have been the first African American, but I certainly don't think I was the last African American on campus to be tapped for that. Other things I did, I started getting involved in the civil rights movement. And we were sitting in and doing things like that because at that time, we really couldn't go shopping in Ann Arbor, okay? And that incident I told you about with the guys, I never got my drink. And I did not know that I had actually performed a sit-in because we weren't allowed in that drugstore. Yes. And my sister inadvertently, she saw something she liked in the store called Cousins, and it was on State Street. So she went in, used to being able to try on things, tried it on, and then the women there told her she couldn't do it, and all kinds of things happened. And then I'm at Markley hearing, did you hear that someone went into Cousins and tried to, try on something? And I'm going, no kidding. And so I was really shocked when I found out it was my sister, the artist. So lots of pioneering things. Lots of pioneering things.
Um, so, you've touched on that this kind of being the first among three, or third among, three, kind of has oriented your experience to the university.
Yes.
What other kinds of lessons did you learn from your, either, kind of experiences of race as it follows you?
Well, now here are the good things. It was called National Negro History Week at that time. And we decided we were going to have one, okay? And the good thing is, as we explored different things, there was faculty that would help us. And I recall being the cultural chair. And I recall, I got Vera Embry up. She was the great dance teacher at Central High. And because she was there, and Ellis Robb, who was a guest artist in residence at the music school or something, he actually saw her, and that helped her regarding some Broadway things, okay? Because of her, Langston Hughes was coming into town in Detroit, so we were able to bring him up. It ended up being kind of a wonderful experience, both for us and the university. And there were always those pockets, if you could take the time and if you could do it, that you could do really neat things at the University of Michigan and kind of bring other people to what was a growing civil rights experience. I'd say that. And that's how I met Martin Luther King. A group, a very progressive group, announced they were bringing him to campus. And I said to my roommate, Carol, at the time, I'm now in Martha Cook, how can they bring him to the campus and none of us are involved? Who's on the committee? Nobody. Well, that's just not right. I used to do things like, that's just not right. What's the name of the person in charge? I called them and I said, I'm representing all the black sororities and, yeah, I did. I mean, like all 25 of us. And we really want to be a part of the committee. Well, we've done all the work and he's coming. Well, I said, that's not acceptable. I'm just going off, but I was just so angry. So then she said, well, since you know him, I don't recall saying I knew him. She said, since you know him, you can drive with us to the airport to get him. So I said, fine. Then I said to my roommate, well, it can't be too hard to find him. How many people, at that time, going on a plane was an elite experience. So how many Negroes are going to be on this plane? It'll be only him, so I'll know him. And as my roommate said to me, but he doesn't know you. And when you come up there, they think, okay, so that was our situation. We get there, and I'm praying to God the whole time. We get there, and my task is to go out. Well, don't you know, there are 2 Negro men of same build on this plane. Now, so I literally prayed, okay, which one? I went up to him, and it was him, and I said, like in 2 seconds, Reverend King, they think I know you. Could you act like you know me? On behalf of all the Negroes on campus, could you just act like you know me? And he's a very quiet man. So he's looking at me, he does that to my hand, and we go back. I have no idea what this man's going to say. And they sit me in the back with him, and they're in the front. And when it's all quiet, he says to me, how's your mother? And I go, oh, she's just fine. And that's my introduction to Martin Luther King. And of course, I became very involved and became a founding member of the State of Michigan chapter of SCLC. But that's how I met them. And that's kind of at Michigan, you had to kind of do things like that in order for inclusion to occur. But once you pointed it out, even if the response wasn't the best response, it at least was a response that you could work with.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about your kind of extracurricular activities and experiences?
Oh, let's see. Um, I would like to talk about the fact that I was in with a group of students, both black and white, who cared about other people. And so a lot of the experiences were in terms of helping people less fortunate. And I think even though I came to the university with that concept, the university finally honed that as a part of my professional commitment would always be that caring. Now, at the same time, I I used to, even in sixth grade, I was editor of the school paper. And these are basically all white schools, junior high, high. When I got to Michigan, the folks who'd been editor of the paper before, Judy Oppenheim, Mark Allender, they were into the daily. I didn't necessarily go straight to the daily. First, I was just overwhelmed. Let me stay here, please. But I did start writing certain things outside the realm. And so in my senior year, I kept getting these letters from Time Inc. And I never opened them. I thought they were solicitations and all. And finally my parents called and said, "We have gotten a call. They're trying to reach you at Time Magazine." I said, "You're kidding." And my mother said, "Would you call them?" And I called, and I became their recruit for their first wave in terms of integrating the editorial staff at Time Magazine. There were three of us. I was on the editorial staff. There was Wally Terry as correspondent, and there was Marcia Menz in back of the book. So I literally graduated on one day, and 3 days later I was in New York at 20, working for Time Magazine instead of teaching.
So, do you have a best memory of from your time at Michigan, either from your time as an undergrad or your time going back to law school?
Best memory of people in both experiences. When you go back as an older student, you're so busy acclimating to a dorm. You get out of that as soon as you can and live somewhere else. But you're first put in the dorm. And acclimating to maybe everyone thinking of you as their older sister or someone, so you hear every problem there is. So you have to kind of redefine your boundaries. But once you do that, I've just met some wonderful people. And all of them didn't start out wonderful at all. They've been a part of my growing commitment, and I know I've been a part of theirs. I am the black person, the African American, or the one they start off saying you're the exception, but by the time we've really known each other, they know there are communities out there. I am not an exception.
What about a worst memory?
Yeah. And it has an interesting ending. I really had to bring up my grades after my first semester. And so I thought, well, I'm going to take public speaking, because all along I have always won all these public speaking awards, junior high, high school, got to the state level in a forensic. So I know I'm getting an A there, right? And so I take this course, and it's going very fine, and I'm always one of the top two, right? So we get to the semifinal time, and the teacher is telling us where we stack up. And he's giving out a grade mark, and we read it. Mine said D. Yes. And I go, D? For what? And he said he just didn't find me, I just couldn't speak. Oh, I cried, and my parents tell me, oh, come on. And my mother finally says, well, go and do a poem for him. Do something. So I went and did The Creation with James Weldon Johnson. And afterwards he said, "Miss Moseley, this is not a football team where you're trying to do your best. I could care less." Now, I am really frightened. I cannot get a D. Okay? Cannot. So, my favorite teacher, Professor Barrows, who was the honors, I mean, other people were afraid of him. I found him delightful. He had an acerbic wit, it is true, but he was just delightful. Anyways, I was to see him regarding some project I was doing, but I think I ended up crying. Now, this man, he's a little aloof. He is not touchy-feely by any definition. So here I am, his only black student, crying. He goes, "What's the matter?" He doesn't really want to know, and I know he doesn't want to know. But I tell him, and he says, "What?" I mean, he's getting involved. He's usually only involved in literature. He is kind of getting involved in my case. And he says, "That just can't happen." So anyways, I do my best in all my classes, and I'm waiting to get the postcard before you get the transcript to tell me what I'm getting in this course. And I got the postcard, and it said B+++, you win this time. Okay, fast forward. It's the 1990s. I'm coming back to teach at Michigan. And I'm told, and this is a result of Duderstadt's experiment. Okay, I wouldn't be teaching there without his experiment of getting things going and having worked. Okay. I am told I'm teaching corporate communication, advanced writing, public policy course, ethnic issues in the media, and I think a First Amendment course in the lit school. And I'm in the communication department, and I'm told at first, till they found an office for me, I would be with the emeritus professors, 3 of them, and I'd be the 4th in the office. I'm fine. I'm bringing in my stuff, and I'm looking at the names, and I see this person's name. Oh my God, I'm going to be in an office with this man? Well, I had to really go, what will I say when I see him? You know, I went through a whole thing. Well, when I finally saw him, he was so much older and so frail that kind of took away the sting there. We never acknowledged we had a history, but I knew, I could understand that he knew it too. And then the resolution of everything was, I had to go to a conference in San Francisco, believe it, on the Western literature, and they wanted input on black cowboys. And before I was told I had to do this, I didn't know a thing about black cowboys, and nor did I care. But by the time I got to that conference, I knew everything, and I cared greatly. I look up, and there's this man. And I'm going, how did he get, and he is really there evaluating me. And you know, you return to the person you were when you first met them. So I'm in a room full of white guys. There's not another woman there. And there are folks from MIT. It's all over there. I mean, this is a big conference on the West. Who knew? And so after I give my presentation about how, in fact, the West was freedom land for freed blacks and escaped slaves, because if they learned how to handle cattle, if they learned how to lead a wagon train, nobody cared what color you were. The only time that mattered was when the territory was beginning to get civilized and women were coming in. And the black cowboy then knew he had to move on to the next place and all. And there were black cowboys who created the lariat. You know, there was kind of nice, good stuff. So when I finished this presentation, the guy from MIT said to me, and I'm using that, so you see, people are taking this seriously. He said to me, well, why do you think there aren't any black cowboys on TV? Because at this time, cowboy shows were everything. And I said, well, let me think about that. And before I could say something, some guy from some other school said, because they're carrying a gun. No white man wants to see a black man with a gun, and particularly if it's acceptable. because these are all of their things. And so I said, well, let's discuss this. And we did for a while. Afterwards, this man, this professor who had been chair of the department, who had been many things at Michigan, and still was, okay, but I now had my own office and he was still, he came over to me. He shook my hand, never did that before, and said that was good. And I said thank you and floated away. I hope I wasn't too long with that story.
Oh no, that was wonderful. Thank you for sharing it. So the university has complex histories of social tensions and student activism, which you've kind of touched on a little bit so far. Do you want to share a little bit more on how they affected your experiences at the university, either as a student or later as a faculty member and staff member?
Yes, I'd like to talk more about when I came back as a consultant and then as a faculty member. I came back as a consultant to work for the Office of the President under James Duderstadt. The university was in crisis. He was the newly appointed president, and it was a racial crisis, and something had to be done. And one of the things I can talk about was one of my assignments was actually interviewing every dean just to find out what do they think, how do they think, and all that kind of stuff, just like you're doing with me. And in that interview process, it became clear none of them had ever even thought about it as a priority in any way, shape, or form. And if they did, perhaps their response wasn't all that he as a president would hope for. So there were lots of things and recommendations that could be put into practice almost immediately. The other part of that is how do you get communities excited about Michigan, urban communities, because they were sending kids to Michigan State, but saying, oh no to Michigan. So that was another area we talked about, and I am very happy to say that due to the projects under Duderstadt, the minority population, both black, Hispanic, it just increased tremendously, and these were students who could stay, because retention is as much an issue as just getting there. Okay, when I was in law school, I was research assistant for Lee Bollinger as an older student. So later, this is after my Duderstadt experience, when he became dean of the law school, and I would joke with him, he was in France when they made him dean. I said the person that wasn't there got to be dean, because the law school was bubbling with issues. He asked me to do a confidential study of every minority graduate from the University of Michigan, Latino. And since its inception, every living, if I could find them. And it was a very confidential study, and we certainly did it. And it helped him in many ways there, and I think later as president. But he said, but whatever you do, do not do curriculum. I don't think that's important. Well, you can't not do it if every time you're talking to someone, that's what they're talking about. And so for a lot of them, they were talking about the 14th Amendment class. Whether they were in the law school increased minority enrollment in the late 60s. Before that, we were coming in twos a decade. Okay, 50, they were about 2, 40, they were about, so, okay. But in that 60s, and the golden age was the 70s, then things started petering off. But no matter what decade you were talking, they would talk about 14th Amendment, and that, now here it is, Title VII, it's all about race and equality and all, but it would be taught as age, as gender, anything but race. So when I told him that, he didn't believe me. That can't be. So he did send the memo out, and everyone teaching it at that time said with great arrogance, I would say, oh no, I choose age and gender. So they did change the curriculum a little. I can't talk about much of that experience, but I felt like I had made a difference. I really did. And the other time I felt I made a difference was when the university, I think it was Harlan Hatcher, I don't know which one, decided it was going to increase the African American population. I was in my junior year, and Leonard Sain was brought onto campus to be the first of the minority, whatever they're called. And I was his student assistant. And one of the things, and I remember this, one of the things I felt strongly about was that black people don't know each other, that the all-black school valedictorian did not know the Cranbrook Three or something like that. And so I was trying to tell him that I really thought it wasn't either or. You have to bring them both together, because here's where they have to meet to provide leadership for community in the future. And I think they eventually came to that, but not at first. At first, there was just a run on valedictorians of all black schools. Well, Michigan is not just academics, it's a social environment, and you've got to have a transition over. So a lot of the programs that have helped the transition were fertilized at that time. And the whole concept that you don't get rid of the students who have already been there, or from, they've demonstrated an A in an integrated setting. You got to keep them with those who've also gotten A's in an all-black setting, because when they come on campus, they will meet, they will get to know each other, and they can mentor each other, because they each have strengths that the other needs to have. Okay, so that's when I was an undergrad. Now, before I'm on the faculty, when I got to the faculty, I discovered, and I was a King Chavez Parks visiting professor who visited for 10 years. Okay, I discovered that if you were really going to be meaningful, you had to keep your office door open for whoever came in. And once students of color learned that there was any professor who listened to them, I'm commuting from Detroit, and I just sometimes wouldn't get home till 9 or 10, because I'd seen all of my students. And as it turned out at first, till I could do something to change it, my classes were all white, and they closed on the first day. So I had to find out, well, wait a minute, I have students out here who say they keep trying to get into my class. Well, and I'm really proud of this. The minority students told me that because they're on scholarship, they can't pick their classes till the last day of registration. So of course everything's closed. And it was more than a hissy fit. I led the banner on that. So that was changed, and when that was changed, I got more students. I had smaller classes, so it's hard to do that, but I at least got enough, so I was satisfied. There's an equal opportunity here. But I think every black faculty member has a responsibility that other faculty members don't. They really must be there for students. And for white students too, because you're their first experience in many, many ways. So if later they can say, I had a professor who blah, 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 and she was black or Hispanic or whatever, and she, I really learned a lot. I think that's saying a lot. So how you help on campus, and that is diametrically opposed to junior faculty is told, publish or perish. Teaching is a reason you're here, but not your primary reason. And these come into conflict, and they're part of the reason there are issues on campus now.
So thinking about the issues on campus today, is there any advice you would want to share with current University of Michigan students?
Well, yes. Some things never change. They go in cycles. And you are now in a cycle of protest, and there are things to protest about. And make sure your strategy as a student is such that you leave more than a footprint in the sand. And as for the faculty and the administration, listen. Now, we've been through this a couple times now, so there are no surprises. And there are ways to fix this permanently if you want to. And you have people around you and near you who can offer the wisdom and advice, but use them. Don't act as if, wow, this is happening and what do we do? And like it's the first time again. It can be solved. And it doesn't have to keep popping up. Maybe something else will, but this really doesn't have to keep popping up.
Do you have anything more specific you'd like to add to that?
Whoever's in charge of it, call me.
Okay, so this is the end of the kind of prepared questions that we have. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, either about about your time at the university or how the university shaped your trajectory after graduation? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, it's great being a Michigan grad. I mean, it is really true, even on the East Coast. Oh, you're from Michigan. That's okay. Because they're so terrible about most schools from the Midwest. So that's always nice. And the network of people that you meet through being a Michigan alum is nice if you want to take it up. If you don't, you also have the freedom not to, because I understand there are some schools, once you're an alum, you're caught in this terrible crucible of you must be active. And we're so big, we don't have to do that to our poor alums. In terms of what I do, Michigan is so critical to who I am. Michigan gave me a self-confidence that I don't think I would have when I'm pioneering out in other areas. You can call me stupid, but I know I'm not. Okay? You can call me ignorant. I'm not. You can call me any of these things, which I have certainly been called. And I still keep going on. And the tenacity also that the university breeds in you is holds you in good stead. Now, you do have to have other support units, but if you survive Michigan, you can basically survive anything else. And you can love Michigan. You can love Michigan for the discipline acquired, for it's a great group, but it needs healing in certain areas. That's how I put my Michigan experience.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories
Okay.
with us. We do appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.